Hello and welcome to part 13 of this Kerbal Space Program 2 for Science video series. So in part 12 we went to Joule, and in this video I was originally intending to go to Tylo. However, I'm having a little bit of trouble preparing for that mission, so I decided to do this video just to add a bit more content, and also we do need a little bit more science for the rocket I'm planning on sending to Tylo, because even though we have just under 25,000, we're going to need about 26-ish. But anyway, yeah, so in this video we're actually going to go to Tylo, so not Tylo, Ike, should I say. So yeah, we'll go to the tracking station and we will track the Threes Company mission, which is already tracked. And that just requires us to land a crew of 3 on Ike, so it's a pretty easy mission to do. But yeah, let's get to the launch pad and get into the launch. So we're going to use this rocket for this mission. This is my Juno Monument lander. The only difference though is I've taken the deorbit stage off of the bottom of the lander section just because we don't need it, and there's more than enough fuel in this rocket to actually get us to Ike and back. So anyway, yeah, we'll get into the launch. And as usual, I'm going to skip through this launch. I'm also going to skip the transfer maneuver to Juno. If you want to know how to do that, I do have a couple of videos which detail how to do that. Part 2 of the series shows you how I always get into orbit, and then my how to get to Juno video will show you how to get to Juno. But yeah, anyway, as I say, once we are on our transfer trajectory to Juno, we will get into going to Ike, so I'll see you in a moment. Right, so now we are in our transfer trajectory to Juno. What we're going to do is we are going to first of all try and get an encounter with Ike. So the first thing we'll do is we will create a maneuver node about halfway in between Kerbin and our entering SOI marker. And we'll know we have created the maneuver on the correct orbit because we get our orange Juno periapsis. And if we were on the wrong orbit, then nothing would actually happen there. But yeah, now we are set, we can lower our inclination to start off with, because as you can see, Ike is in an equatorial orbit around Juno, and then we're also going to move our orbit in towards Ike's orbit line. And once we're a bit closer, we can actually match our inclination a bit better. So we'll line up Ike's orbit so it's flat, and we will get ourselves in roughly the same inclination. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sweep across Ike's orbit to see if we can't get an inclination. And ideally, when entering a moon or any body like this, we really need to be travelling in the same direction that it is travelling. So we'll see if we can't get an inclination on this side of Juno to start off with, or an encounter even. So you can see we aren't actually getting an encounter on that side. Now if I keep going, yeah, we are getting an encounter on the other side. However, that we don't really want to be doing, because what's going to happen is not only are we going to be trying to get into orbit around Juno, it's going to try and flip our orbit so we are travelling in the opposite direction, and that will use a hell of a lot more delta V. So what we'll do is we will come back above Ike's orbit line, and we're actually going to warp into Juno's sphere of influence and create our orbit, and then get an encounter with Ike. So the first thing we want to do, of course, is do our mid-course correction. And it's only a 13 delta V burn is this, so it's only going to require a small amount of throttle. So now that's done, we're going to warp into Juno's sphere of influence. We'll know we are on the correct line because, as you can see, the full orbit will disappear, and also it's hard to see from this angle, but when we get the correct one, our trajectory inside Juno will actually highlight as well. So you can see there it is highlighting, meaning that that is inside of Juno's sphere of influence. So we'll time warp to point. And now we are in here, we can think about circularizing around Juno. So we will just simply create a maneuver and circularize our orbit. Now it's saying that we will be using 1,485 delta V, whereas we only have just over 1,000 on the stage, so we might need to go to the next stage, but that shouldn't be an issue because landing on Ike is relatively easy given that it's got very little gravity. Although, of course, one other thing is because, as I mentioned before, when we are burning fuel, we're actually losing weight. So our thrust to weight increases, I believe it is. So yeah, what's going to happen is we're probably going to go way below, and we might only need to use a tiny little bit of fuel from the next stage. Oh yeah, we just had enough fuel in that stage to get into orbit. So yeah, we'll get rid of that. And now we'll treat this pretty much like we did with the moon. So we will set that as set Ike as the target. You can see we are at a 0.8 degree inclination, which isn't too bad. So I'm just going to ditch at this stage we're on at the moment. Then we're going to point at anti-normal. And once there, we will warp to the or the ascending node even, and then flatten out our inclination. And now that's done, what we can do is create a maneuver anywhere on our orbit, and we can bring our orbit down towards Ike's orbit line, and then we should be able to just move the maneuver node around until we actually get an encounter. And there we are going into Ike's orbit. And now, because we are already in orbit around Juno, it's actually giving us a nice horseshoe shape, which means we're only going to need to use a very small amount of fuel to actually get into orbit around Ike. So we're going to aim for about 50 kilometers above the surface. So we'll find our maneuver node, and we're just going to reduce our or increase our height a tiny little bit. Now that's set, we can point at this maneuver and perform this burn. So one thing I would always recommend before doing a warp when trying to get to a moon is actually focusing on its parent body first, because quite often, especially if we're doing particularly high warps, then the moon is orbiting very fast and it can get quite disorientating. But yeah, anyway, we'll continue our warp and actually get ourselves into Ike's SOI. And now that is set, we can warp into Ike's sphere of influence. So yeah, now we're here, we can do our first bit of science. So we'll hit the experiment button. That'll give us a couple hundred science, and then we're just going to create another maneuver on the Ike periapsis. Make sure it's nice and central, and then perform our capture burn. And it doesn't have to be perfectly circular because we're not planning on rendezvousing with anything, and we have already ditched the other stage anyway. So yeah, now that is set, we can point at this maneuver and actually get ourselves into orbit around Ike. So anyway, yeah, let's start thinking about where we are going to land. So the thing about Ike is it is quite a bumpy surface. It can be a little bit of a challenge to find a flat landing spot. As you can see, there are some very interesting kind of volcanoes here and there as well, which can be quite an interesting place to land, but because the sides are so steep, they can be a little bit more difficult to land in than anywhere else on the surface. So we're just going to land somewhere relatively central in the light side of the planet. So we'll start off by creating a manoeuvre on the opposite side of the planet, and then we'll reduce our periapsis down to about 20 kilometers above the surface. The reason we're going to 20 kilometers instead of 10 is because, well, there are a lot of very high points which can be easy to actually hit and fall into, and also when you go below a certain altitude, the periapsis will start to automatically drop, so we need to be careful with that to make sure that we don't accidentally end up, hitting the surface when we don't want to. But yeah, now we are set with that, we can reduce our periapsis and then start actually thinking about where we're going to land. So as you can see, once we go below a certain height, I think it might be around about 16,000 meters above the surface, the warp will go to 3 times warp, so it can take a little bit of a while, which is why we went to a relatively high warp. Obviously the higher the warp you're in, the higher the orbit you're in even, the more warp you actually get. But now we're in low orbit, we can actually do more science, so we'll get that out of the way. And as I said, and as you can see, it is rather bumpy as well, so it can be quite challenging to actually work out where to land. But once our periapsis timer has reached 0 seconds, we will then do our retrograde burn and start to actually get ourselves onto the surface. Yeah, so now we are coming down to 0 seconds. We'll point our ship at retrograde. We're also going to make sure that the brown part of the nav ball is pointed up, or the top of the nav ball, because that makes doing any adjustments a little bit easier. So what I mean by that is, now if we press W on the keyboard, it will pitch our rocket forwards, S will pitch it backwards, and then A will pitch it left and D will pitch it right. And that just makes actually getting to a landing site a little bit easier, because we are probably going to need to get to a hover. But anyway, let's go to full throttle and start to get ourselves down towards the surface. And now there is a bit of a strange thing that happens with the impact marker on Ike, because as you can see, the actual impact marker is way above the surface. And we need to watch out for that, because there have been times where I've gone past the impact marker and it's actually classed as crashing. So we need to be careful about that. But anyway, we are going to basically try and stop our horizontal speed. And now that is done, we can just start going straight down. And when we get closer to the surface, we'll be able to get a better idea of where the generally flat areas are, and where the other bits that aren't so flat are. But obviously we also need to make sure that our velocity bug is set to surface, because as you can see, our retrograde marker was in completely the wrong place. And there have, well, there's been times when I've been doing this mission where it's not even changed during the final descent, so it's best just to make sure that we are definitely on surface on the velocity bug. And anyway, yeah, let's warp a little bit closer to the surface. And then once we start to get close, we're going to cut the throttle and we're going to increase, cut the warp and increase our throttle. And we can also extend the landing legs and ladders now. As I say, on this particular rocket, the ladders are, or the port on the 3-man command pod is actually we want them facing away from us basically, so we can, like I say, do our adjustments as we intend them. But anyway, we're starting to get close, so we'll make sure that we are going relatively slowly. We don't want to be hitting the ground too fast. But we also don't want to be reducing our throttle so far that we end up using more fuel than we need. So although, as I said, because Ike's surface gravity is so kind of little, there's so little of it, we're not going to use a huge amount of fuel to actually get into a hover. But anyway, you can see our shadow is there, and it's looking from this angle like the landing site is actually relatively flat. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom out and I'm going to have a look at it. You can see it isn't as flat as we think it is, so we're actually going to come over to the right there and try and land on top of this ridge. So we'll make sure we aren't actually going down too far. In fact, we're actually going to go up a little bit again, and I'm going to press D to pitch ourselves over to the right. And the other thing we need to do is make sure that the nav ball is locked to up, because otherwise, if we were still locked to retrograde, then it'd end up flicking us straight back to our retrograde marker. It'd even flip us upside down now because we are going up. And that just, like I say, when we are pointed up on the nav ball, it just makes it a little bit easier to actually do our adjustments. But anyway, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to rotate the ship so that the prograde marker is on the top, and that way we'll know we're actually pointed in the correct direction. And I'm also going to cut the throttle because we are getting a bit high at the moment. Now we're just going to keep going down again and trying to gather exactly where we want to land. We'll reduce our descent rate and we'll try and make sure that we are below, below 5 meters per second is ideal for landing. But we also need to make sure that we aren't travelling horizontally, because as you can see we are travelling across at the moment. So I'm going to go up a little bit more, cut the throttle. Once we start to descend, we will point at retrograde and then kill off our horizontal velocity and try and get ourselves onto the ground safely. So yeah, now we are descending, we can point at retrograde. We'll increase the throttle to stop our horizontal velocity. Like I say, because the gravity is so light on Ike, we only want to do slight adjustments to the throttle to make sure that we're not actually going to go too far. But anyway, now we are on the ground. So yeah, that was quite a flat little bit that we managed to land on. As you can see, if we'd have landed a few feet behind us or a few feet ahead of us, we'd have probably fallen over. But anyway, yeah, that's us down on Ike. So we've completed that mission. We can now do a little bit more science. And of course, we also want to EVA and get the surface sample. And then naturally, now we're here, we want to plant a flag as well. So there is actually a strange bug at the moment, which I presume is going to get patched out before long, where when we plant a flag anywhere in the Kerbal system at the moment, we actually get a message saying we've completed a mission. So if we go to the Mission Control Center, you can actually see that what it's done is it's completed the second Dibs mission, which requires us to plant a flag on Pol, and Ike definitely isn't Pol. Now you can actually do this mission anywhere. You can even do it on the launch pad at the KSC. Like I say, it's a bit of a bug. It gives us 3,000 science that we technically haven't earned yet. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably not even going to submit that for the time being until we've actually landed or planted a flag on pole. But anyway, yeah, that's just a little strange little bug that I've noticed while doing the last couple of missions. But yeah, let's get back to our ship and we'll start thinking about going home. So we could always use our jetpack and have a fly around. It might be interesting getting on top of that mountain and getting a bit more science, but as I say, we don't really need a huge amount of science at the moment, so we're just going to go straight back home. And I'm not that knowledgeable about where all the biomes are on Ike anyway, since, I mean, this is only like the 4th or 5th time I've actually landed on Ike. So yeah, we're just going to get straight into orbit and not waste any more time. So because we are on an equatorial orbit, what we'll do is we will go down the 90-degree line on the nav ball. So I'm actually going to leave the bottom half of this stage on the surface as well as a kind of a marker to where we actually landed. So as with any two-stage lander, we actually need to take off with both stages first to make sure that we get our trajectory line. So we'll increase the throttle a tiny bit until we take off. Then once we're a little way above the surface, we will cut the throttle, stage, and go to full throttle. And now we can pitch down the line to 90 degrees. And we'll hold about 45 degrees until we get to a relatively decent height above the surface, probably around about 25 kilometers. Now that's set, we can create our orbital maneuver. Once again, we don't have to worry about actually getting a circular orbit, we can just go anywhere into orbit and that will do the trick. But yeah, now that's set, we'll point at the maneuver and perform this burn. So yeah, now we're in orbit, it's just a matter of getting back to Kerbin. So it's a simple enough procedure as this one. We will first of all create a manoeuvre on the retrograde orbit of Ike's, well, the retrograde line of Ike's orbit, because we want to be getting higher to escape Juno's sphere of influence. But before we do that, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that Ike is on the retrograde line of Juno. So I'm going to quickly go to the sorry, it needs to be on the prograde line actually, don't it? Yeah, so we're going to make sure that Ike is on the prograde line of Juno. And yeah, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go to the tracking station and actually do this warp up there. Either that, or we could actually increase our apoapsis a bit. But yeah, I'll go to the tracking station and I'll get us in position, and then once there, we will get back home. So now we have Ike on Juno's prograde line. What we'll do is we'll create a manoeuvre, and as I say, we're going to burn prograde to Ike's direction of travel. And the reason for that is it's just like any manoeuvre. When we wanted to get up from a planet, we want to go prograde to its direction of travel, whereas going down from a planet, we'd want to go retrograde. So we'll make sure we are just skipping out of Ike's sphere of influence. And what this is doing now is it's actually throwing us straight out of Juno's sphere of influence as well. So that, as I've said before, will put us in roughly the same orbital trajectory as Juno, which should make it quite easy to actually get back to Kerbin. Anyway, yeah, now that is set, we will get ourselves leaving Juno. There we are, now we are ready to actually get back to Kerbin. So the reason I've done it like this is, as I say, we don't actually have Kerbin and Juna in the correct orbital, transfer window, that's it, because we would want Juna ordinarily to be up here somewhere. So what we can actually do is we can create a maneuver on our orbit, and if we target Kerbin, we should then just be able to bring our periapsis down, and if we sweep around our orbit, we'll be able to eventually get an encounter with Kerbin. There we are. So yeah, we'll fine-tune this orbit, and as usual, because we're probably going to have quite a lot of delta V left when we actually get to Kerbin, we're going to go for around about 75 kilometers above the surface, and that way we'll be able to do a deceleration burn or a re-entry burn when we actually get there. So yeah, now that's set, we will perform this burn. And once again, it can be very easy to actually skip straight through Kerbin's sphere of influence, so we'll make sure we are looking down on the Kerbal system, and then once we have performed the burn, when we start to get close, we'll reduce the throttle and manage it until we actually get our encounter. There we are, so let's check our encounter and make sure we're getting down nice and close to Kerbin. And you can see it is starting to bring us underneath it now, so we will point ourselves at prograde and orient the nav ball, and then we can just use our translation controls to actually get ourselves to where we want to be. So because we are inclined, we'll use the J or L keys, and it seems to be J is bringing us up. And we can also use any of the other keys like the K or I keys to actually bring us down as well, but J seems to be doing it, and it can be a bit rocky, but we'll get there eventually. But yeah, so 91 will do for that, I believe. So yeah, now we can warp back to Kerbin. And once we are there, we will perform our deceleration burn. And as with any deceleration burn, we'll create the manoeuvre ahead of our periapsis. We're going to burn until the tank is empty, and then we are going to get our periapsis down to about 25 kilometers. So as long as we are below 30 kilometers, we shouldn't actually have any trouble getting in. But yeah, now that is set, we can do our deceleration burn and get back home. But yeah, so that is pretty much all there is for this video. In the next video, we are going to be going to Tylo. Like I say, it has been quite a challenging mission to actually prepare for. It's taken quite a bit of work since I've never been to Tylo before doing that, preparing for the next video. The rocket as well is a bit of a complicated one, but we'll get into that in the build guide. And we are going to also be using gravity assists quite a lot to get to Tylo as well, so I'll try and explain how gravity assists work as best I can, but as I say, because I've never been to Tylo before, I've also never done gravity assists, so it's all kind of experimental and new for me, so it might be a little bit kind of rough and raw the next video, but or the next couple of videos, because I'm probably going to split it up into 2 or 3 different videos for that particular mission. But anyway, as I say, that's all there is for this particular one. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.